Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about the Fed meeting and the press conference that followed and how Powell has seemingly changed the game a bit. Logan, welcome back to the podcast on this very important day.
This is a lot has happened on this Wednesday on with economic data, with some commodity tariff news, and of course it's Fed Day. I can't. I'm going to say President Trump is probably upset with Powell's Fed presser, but boy, a lot went on this morning before even the Fed talked, and I think it lays a groundwork of uncertainty with Powell and Trump. It really makes Chris Waller look really good for the next Fed chairman. When I was listening to Powell talk, I was like, "Oh, Chris Waller looks to be, the next Fed chair easily." With some of the things that he talked about.
Okay, let's start at the top with the economic data that came in and the GDP growth and what you think that means on the headline, but also when you get into it.
So GDP growth beat estimates 3%. Just like the first quarter, the import-export data just messes everything up. But the first quarter, the real, we always talked about the Federal Reserve is really looking at the real final sales data of GDP. And they've always said, it's always been good. And, we think the economy's fine. The last two numbers weren't great, especially today's GDP print on real final sales. So the thing that they held their hat on for the GDP numbers is slowly fading on them as well. So in that regards, a lot of people saw the headline beat, but when you broke down the numbers, you could see there's some issues with the quality of the report. And I think a lot of people who track economics understand that. There's a lot of tariff news on, it appears that Trump is ready to kind of somewhat go to war with the BRIC nations over Russia. So we could get very noisy over the next 7 to 10 days. But ADP print came out last month. It was negative. This month, 104,000 jobs created. But the Fed presser was really, really interesting with Powell, considering everything that's gone on.
Okay, well, let's dive in there. From your perspective, what was the overall thing that you were like, okay, wait a second?
So before we started the year out, we said that the unemployment rate is going to be key. Right. And if the unemployment rate is the key, and if labor force growth is growing, that unemployment rate should rise just because the payroll data is slowing. I think everyone understands that as well. Payroll growth has been slowing for some time. But what's occurred is Powell said, well, there's not a lot of people looking for work anymore because immigration has slowed down. And that's the counter that we've talked about, that if the labor force growth doesn't grow, the unemployment rate can stay lower for longer. And he had really, really highlighted the unemployment rate more than any other time that I've seen, because he's using that now as cover. Because do you know why, Sarah?
Labor over inflation?
No. He's being very clever here. See, if Trump figured out what he was doing, Trump would be fuming. Because immigration has lowered the labor force growth, the unemployment rate can stay lower. And he's forcing that, even though the private payroll data, so much of the, healthcare services, government jobs, those have been the big drivers of job growth. Even with private payroll slowing down and him acknowledging that, he just kept on talking about the unemployment rate and that the supply of workers are lower. So unlike Christopher Waller, who says the private payroll growth is not doing good, others saying the housing market is in a recession, where Chairman Powell was talking about the housing market is a special case. It really left like not a clear signal out there. Of course, we're going to have 2 job reports and inflation reports before the next meeting, but I can't imagine Trump would be happy I think, because, oddly enough, in some weird way, he was almost trolling Trump. Well, immigration's not here. There's less people looking for work. The unemployment rate is low. We believe we're at full employment. So where Christopher Waller and Bowman and some other people might be saying the private payroll is slowing down a lot. If you didn't have government jobs, it would look worse. And Powell kind of said, yeah, but, the unemployment rate is low and we don't see layoffs yet. So hypothetically, you could have like 5 straight reports of 60,000 jobs being created and they wouldn't budge in theory, but he did acknowledge that there are some risks to the labor market going out. And I was like, risks? If you were talking about risks, then you should be a neutral policy. And, so it's one of these things with back and forth. Well, inflation is above target. We're not quite sure about the goods inflation, but we just want to make sure it's a one-time price hit. We see deals being made, but we don't know when it's all said and done. So I just can't imagine Trump would be happy with that.
So interesting. Maybe the ref is tired of the bully ball and like, oh yeah, you think you're going to push me around? I'm just going to be like, yeah, I don't think we need to do anything right now.
Yeah. So it does become, an interesting aspect where even if the jobs data missed estimates, but the unemployment rate didn't budge. I mean, under this premise that Powell from what I saw him say, yeah, that's not gonna do it for me. It's gonna do it for Chris Waller. I thought this was a great introduction to the next Fed chairman, Chris Waller. That's part of the take that I got, that if you are Chris Waller, you're basically here. Powell is showing you why you want to replace him with me. So very interesting on that. I don't know how many people caught on to that, but for us, it was our main talking point going into the year with the unemployment rate. It will rise if the labor force data is growing because that's, smaller jobs creation. But in this case, wow, boy, that was a very interesting, and it becomes a very interesting setup with the jobs data now that you can have maybe a very low headline print and not have it mean that much. We'll see how that goes. You're going to get a lot more discussions, but there was a 2 Fed dissents, not shocking. Bowman and Waller both wanted rate cuts. But all this is like, we're fighting to see when to get to neutral policy. This is nothing like Trump wants. Trump wants 3% rate cuts. He talked about it in the morning, said the economy beat estimates, GDP. Now let's get rates lower so people can buy homes and refinance. And again, that's the Trinity, right? That's the rate story is the last. Could you imagine if mortgage rates were at 5.75% today?
Ooh, no.
Instead of 6.75, Trump would be ecstatic. Demand would pick up, it wouldn't be spectacular or anything, but demand will pick up, permits might be able to grow a little. So it's such a fascinating thing. And how Powell talks about housing, he just keeps on saying there's a shortage of housing. That he doesn't ever talk about like the demand side of it. He just says it's weak, right? Someone needs to be a little bit more clever in asking him about housing. And I don't think anybody on that media side knows what to do it. So I'm going to volunteer myself,
I like it.
to kind of trap Powell, because he keeps on answering it the same way in that regards. And of course, we're not talking about 3, we're not talking about 4, we're not even talking about 5% rates. But getting down to 6 would alleviate some of the concerns that a lot of people, including the public, has. But again, that's not ultra low policy with, moving mortgage rates down to 6%. And now that inventory is back to 2019 levels, the supply and demand equilibrium is different now. So fascinating. I think this Fed presser was for the nerds. Like, you really had to go to the underneath stuff to kind of talk about it, because we've said that Powell's used the real consumption data as his protector, and that has kind of faded, and he's acknowledged that, and he's acknowledged, well, there could be some risk to the labor side. But so again, all this is still always how to get to neutral policy. If the labor data starts to get worse, but if the unemployment rate doesn't move up and jobs numbers keeps on falling under this talk today, be like, eh. So I thought a good day for Chris Waller.
This is crazy because that has been our premise. It's labor over inflation. We could say, here's what we can count on. And it seemed like he changed the rules a little bit.
Well, I understand what he meant, that the unemployment rate can stay low even if the labor data gets weaker. What he didn't show concern for is the private payrolls. And he admitted, yeah, the private payrolls are narrowing down on less growth, but he kept on going back to the supply. And when you keep on going back to the supply of workers, you're using that unemployment rate as your cover target right there. So if the unemployment rate does pick up, it should be a little bit weaker on that front.
Okay, so let's talk about how the market reacted. What did 10-year yield do, and where are mortgage rates?
10-year yields, oddly enough, 10-year yield spiked up in the morning after the GDP report and the ADP report. Mortgage pricing actually before the Fed, what I saw was actually positive, which means the spreads got really good today. I mean, one of those days where we always talk about mortgage spreads being very critical. I think this morning was one of those days where you could have bond yields go up and the rates go lower. I don't know what it is right now at this second, but before I got on here, I said, whoa, this was a great spread day. Just for everybody, mortgage spreads is another great story for housing, because it would be a lot worse with rates if spreads didn't improve. And we're starting to teach people mortgage spreads. I'm really happy about that, because nobody knew what it was, but it's so important.
Okay, so it seems like people are eternally hopeful, and they're like, no, September rate cuts look like they're in, that we could maybe get those. What's your thought about September rate cuts?
I mean, it's in, when you start to get dissents in the, remember we wrote that, or we did that podcast a while back, get ready for the Fed civil war, where you start to get more dissents. We're going to have to start like really being meticulous on what Fed presidents say now after economic data, because now there's a clear divergence where some people want rate cuts, and the people that want rate cuts will be the next Fed chairman, possibly. Again, we're Team Waller here. And in this case, it's going to get interesting. It's going to get nitty gritty interesting. So my job is to take the really nerdy side of this debate and try to make it understandable. But we could start to see how Jerome Powell will be less relevant going out until he leaves. Because if you already have dissents by two people that could be possibly the Fed chair, he's not going to be on the podium anymore. And the Fed chairman can rile up the troops in a way. And I believe Waller is the best person to do that, not Kevin Warsh. Hashtag anybody but Warsh. Nobody wants Warsh. Okay.
Well, we don't see him really coming to the fore.
But I mean, it's just, it's like a weasel. It's like somebody who just like, I'm all about rate hikes. Oh, no, I'm going to cut great. There's just that kind of guy that he's just all about one thing, and all of a sudden to gain something, he just completely sells his soul out. No, so Warsh, no, and plus that the Fed presidents hate him. So it's just like some guy who makes fun of all the Fed, and then he's going to come and be in charge. It's just like, whatever, get out of here. But Waller could kind of round up stuff. So it made it very interesting. Like the nerdy side of me is like, wow, that was really interesting, because we had talked about the supply of workers being an important factor. But if it increased, there was one thing, but now they're using it as cover for the low unemployment rate. Ooh, somebody's probably explained that to Trump, and he's probably furious, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But I thought it was a fascinating, nerdy Fed press meter.
I know you loved it. Okay, so we still have jobs coming out. What could that change, given this new sort of dynamic, the way that Powell's looking at it? What would it take now to have a rate cut, or the bond market to get ahead of the Fed based on the jobs report?
Okay, so we might give back a lot on the government job side. Let's give you two hypotheticals. Let's say the jobs report came in at 53,000 and the unemployment rate did tick up. The bond market would go, okay, now you're really pushing it. But you could also have 53,000 jobs report and the unemployment rate fall. or stay flat. And then
crazy.
under Powell's discussion, he'd be like, well, the labor supply is lower, so the unemployment rate is good. So it gets interesting on that side that, you could have a really, and he did acknowledge there is risk to the labor market, but it is interesting to see how the bond market reacts to something like this, because as we have seen before, 3 different times the bond market has gotten well ahead of the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
All 3 times it's been refuted because it's not breaking. And for us, it's always been paper, rock, scissors, labor over inflation. The labor market has to break for them to actually take it to the next stage. And here we are with 2 more reports left. And then now some of the, more prominent stuff of the tariffs coming in, and we're collecting revenue. So it really, as we talked about, starting from, July 1st, the second half of 2025 is going to be lit. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a reality show of nerds and chart daddies on the island, and the economic Love Island is going to have the chart daddy win it all, because we're gonna find a way to make this work and make sense for everyone.
The things you come up with are so funny. A chart daddy Love Island of economists would be ridiculous. That is hilarious. Oh my gosh. So if you're sitting out here and you are in the housing industry, what's your takeaway? Say more of the same.
Well, your take is that you have now people on your side, right? You now have the potential next Fed chairman who's going to be, a little bit more pro housing. You have a lot of people already talking about, well, the housing market's in a recession. We need to do something about it. You have a consumption data line that the Federal Reserve has, held its, because Powell's talked about this, modestly restrictive. Oh, by the way, the economy isn't acting like we're modestly restrictive, but we believe we are. So it is just this discussion from getting from this point to neutral. That's it. If people are looking for 3% rate cuts and stuff you got to toss that aside. So there is a positive in that side that we've entered a realm of dissent, and we've entered a realm where the head person who should be running the Federal Reserve next, it would be kind of on the housing side, where Powell is just now on the other side is saying, labor over inflation, Logan was right about me since 2022. We are just going to wait till this sucker breaks, and then we'll play catch up. But it is a positive in that side that we finally entered the descent stage, and we'll take it from there. And again, a lot can happen from now. This is why we track economic data daily. This is why we do the tracker, so we can highlight that the spreads are really good, and it's really kept things kind of at bay. Another thing, purchase application data came out today. 17% year-over-year growth. Sounds great. Week to week, down 6%. The year-over-year growth is a new listing story. The week-to-week data is not as strong as the year-over-year growth. So if we didn't have the new listings growth, I don't believe we would have had this it's 26 straight weeks of year-over-year growth in purchase apps. Wow. It's 13 straight weeks of double-digit year-over-year growth. And I still think that a lot of that is most sellers are home buyers. So that's the housing economic data of the day. But I think this is very fascinating. I'm very excited. Can you see how excited I am? I'm ecstatic about this. This gets into the meticulous, nerdy side of economics with Powell and Trump. And Laura, I don't know how Trump is going to react off of this. Who knows? By the time we're done with this podcast, we get to go see.
By the time it's done, anything could happen, especially with Trump and Powell. I don't know. Kung Fu fighting is going to break out. That's what it is.
Yes, Kung Fu fighting, like that video I made.
Logan, thank you so much for being on this important day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.
My pleasure.